Welcome to Fearless Finances, where I try to take the fear out of your finances. It's kind of hard to be fearless, though, when we're at war. It turns out that Donald J. has been wanting us to get to war with a lot of places. But instead of getting into one of those traditional wars where we're trying to take over someone's land, we're in a trade war. For no reason. And the interesting thing that I find about this is there's a lot of financial pundits who are surprised by this. Not this one. I've been saying this since Donald J. was elected. If you look back to some of my earlier videos, you're gonna see that just about any time I've talked about the economy, I've talked about the risks that this man will have on our economy. I'm hoping some of those other financial pundits wake up. And do you know who I really hope wakes up? The Republicans who can save us from this. But before we get to any of that, I think it's important to understand why Donald J. is doing this and what we can expect in the future. Now, I know there's lots of people out there telling you a little bit about that, but I have a unique perspective. You see, I've spent my entire career training financial professionals and their companies about the economy, economic trends, government programs, and how they can either help us or hinder us. So I end up having a unique perspective and spin on this. I'm a business owner, I'm an historian, I've got a psychology background, and I understand economics. So let's get to finding out a little bit more about what we can expect from Donald J. and where I believe this is headed. See you on the other side. Okay, point number one, Donald J. is stuck in 1980. Or somewhere around there. I don't know, but somewhere. Now, the reason I say this is I remember when my career was starting out. There was lots of talk about the trade deficit. Now, I think it's also important to put this into context. We were just coming off of the 1970s. And throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, we were a producing country. We were the largest car manufacturer in the world. We were then producing the greatest amount of iron ore and many of the components that go into the materials that the world was building. So throughout these decades, the United States was a world leader in producing and getting out to mass natural resources and plenty of other goods, like washing machines and dryers and refrigerators. But all of that started to shift in the 1970s. And the 1970s was an economic shakeup. There was a lot of volatility in the stock market. There were large measures of inflation. Interest rates went on the rise in the 80s because of it to try to damper down that inflation. We were at war. And then, no, they don't like to call it a war. They like to say the Vietnam conflict. But nonetheless, we were fueling this. And things started to change. Japan started to come in as a strong auto manufacturer. Germany's auto manufacturing started to take hold. And a lot of companies in the United States went through a shakeup. This impacted Donald J. He's always been stuck on this trade deficit idea. And for Donald J., trade is only in tangible things, like a car or a washing machine, or even the steel or lumber that might go into some of these things. This is part of the reason he wants Greenland, is he wants their natural resources. Oh, it's a very difficult time to live through. But it's also important to note that the United States transitioned through that and became a world economic leader. We have the largest GDP in the entire world. We have more wealth than absolutely every other country of the world. Even just California ranks number 3 among all nations of the world in GDP. This is amazing. This is good. This means we don't need to worry about trade deficits. You see, Trump is still stuck back in the 1980s, where when he sees on a chart that the trade deficits are negatively against the United States, and let me take you back another step. A trade deficit means if the United States has one, we're consuming more goods from another country than we're exporting or they're receiving from us. Well, let's take this into a tad of a thought here. We're a nation with 330 some odd million people. That's not how big Germany is, as an example. As a result, we would consume more of things. And here's another thought for you. If you're truly a capitalist and you believe in free markets, you believe in using the efficiency of the market to determine who's best at doing what. That's what capitalism's all about. So when we have a global economy, we've determined that Central America is really good at coffee. Thank you very much, Central America. We love to drink it. We've decided that we might use oil resources from the Middle East. Now, the reason I get a little bit more pensive about just diving into just using the Middle East for their oil and gas is because sometimes we need to pull some levers because there's political reasons to move somewhere else to get that oil, which we'll talk about that in a minute about these tariffs that Donald J. just loves so much. And we might also say that, gosh, Mexico, they've got good avocados. We might be able to grow some of them in California, but we'd rather use that area for our wineries. The world seems to start to love that. So we'll do some wineries and ship that out. And do you know what else we've been shipping out here in the United States? Ideas and innovations. You see, we went from producing cars to figuring out how best to build cars. We went from creating medical devices to actually inventing the best medical care. Donald J. didn't have that in his handy-dandy little chart. He didn't have innovations and ideas in there. You don't get to have the most billionaires in the world, the largest economy in the entire world, and not be doing something right. But Donald J. doesn't take in new information. He has a difficulty actually finding out that other people might have a good idea. So now that we know a little bit more about trade deficits, and I'm going to be real honest with you, back in the 1980s, even when they were talking about all of this, we have a trade deficit against Japan. We have a trade. Who cares? I mean, honestly, this is how I've always felt about it. Who cares? Start building something that we want to build. Start doing things that keep people employed. Give them good wages. Let's just get going. I mean, please, do not get me wrong. When a certain area goes through this transition, like when auto manufacturing changed, or we weren't pulling as much iron ore off the range and melting it in Pittsburgh and shipping it somewhere else, yes, as we transitioned, this caused difficulty for lots of people. And I get that. That's difficult. And that's where government steps in to help people transition and try to find new things. But right now, the United States is not having problems with high unemployment. We are not having issues with certain businesses not doing well. We were doing just fine before Donald Trump did this. Before we go any further, I want to take just a minute and explain to you why I have a little bit of a unique perspective on this. I started my career with an insurance company, so I have spent basically my entire professional career somewhere in the financial services industry. But at that stage of the game, I had not yet finished my degree. So I went back to school. Now, my original thought was, I really didn't want to stay in this whole financial services arena. I wanted to become a psychologist. And so I went back to school, finishing up my psychology degree. My employer would basically pay for any college class I wanted to take, provided I got at least a B in that class and it didn't have to relate to my job. And that went on for a couple of years. Working, getting promoted, continuing my college education. And then they changed the rules. My employer basically said, we'd love to keep educating you. We do. But we want to make sure the degree and the classes you are seeking will benefit you in this career. Now, maybe, if I had been in HR, I could have squiggled this whole psychology degree in there, but I was in sales and marketing. This was gonna be a push. And I thought, you know what? Let me try a few of these business classes and see where that gets me. And my very first business class was an econ class, and I fell in love. Now I know economics is not for everyone, but I thought to myself, OMG, economics is the psychology of money. You're essentially trying to get into the consumer, the business owner, their brain, and figure out how they're going to react to certain things. This is why, unlike some of the other financial pundits, I've always had a unique spin on Donald J. because you can see his psychosis. He is not a smart man. I know he's somehow fooled people, but he is not a smart man. And on top of that, I know people just flippantly throw it out there that he's a narcissist, and clearly that word is overused, but even his niece, Mary Trump, who is a psychologist, has diagnosed him. I'm going to put some of those resources for you down in the doobly-doo. You see, even if people had told, and they probably did tell, Donald J. that Trumps weren't so great, it's stuck in his head. He does not have the ability, especially at this stage of the game, to get bad information out and let new information in. And I honestly question if he ever had that ability. So the only way we are going to be able to turn this around is to get Donald J. out of the way. I've got some other videos where I talk about some of that. We're not going to get into that in this particular video. I do want to talk to you, though, about this whole merger with money and psychology in the whole umbrella of economics. Because the people who actually spend their career just in the economic side sometimes lose sight of who they're really trying to track. And that's the people, and that's the new ideas. You see, if we're really in the world of psychology, and we're trying to figure things out, we should always try being progressive. Trying to find new theories, new ideas, and the same would hold true with people who are in the field of studying economics. That isn't necessarily always what's happening. They stay stuck on these old ideas, like trade deficits, and they're just looking at tangible stuff. We need to rework all these numbers, by the way. Like, this whole trade deficit thing wouldn't even look so bad on Donald J.'s chart. And we'll talk a little bit here about his lovely calculation. We'll talk about it. Because right now, I could just go on and on just about the chart. It's crazy. If you haven't had anybody tell you yet, this calculation chart, crazy. But back to economic theory. This whole trade deficit thing needs to be reworked. We have to look beyond just tangible assets because so much of our world is now services and ideas that we sell This is the same thing with the GDP, the gross domestic product, the thing again that the United States has the biggest thing of. When we're looking at the GDP, we need to start looking at other things other than just things that are actually produced. And we need to break it down to how much that actual GDP is impacting and benefiting all people. All of this reminds me a little bit about Sigmund Freud and his whole penis envy theory. You see, Sigmund was onto something when he said, you know what, women seem to envy men. Now, as a man, he went right to his private parts. He thought, well, good gravy, they must actually envy our penises. Instead of looking a little bit beyond that and going, no, 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 no. We envy your freedom, your ability to control your own life, to be respected for who you are and what you think. That's what we envy, Mr. Freud. And you know what? It's very shocking to me that like 100 years later, women are still trying to fight for that. Because this is the other thing that I think. I think sometimes people don't take my financial theories as readily because they are coming from a woman. But I'm telling you straight up that if you are going to find out how the typical consumer thinks, you might want to let a little bit more women into the process, because for some reason we have a little bit better intuition for that. I don't know if it's born in or if we just get better at it because we're constantly trying to navigate little landmines that are out there and still get things done. But for whatever reason, women seem to be a little bit more intuitive, which is a very helpful skill when it comes to economics. We've talked about this whole thing about the trade deficit, and it can't just be on durable goods. The United States has been actually producing lots of things that have nothing to do with durability that have made us wealthy. But I'd also like you to consider this for a minute. Part of the reason that trade deficit exists is because we are so wealthy. Americans buy so much that there's an entire industry for storage to store our stuff. As a result, any rational person would expect, and yes, Donald J., I am implying that you might not be fully rational. Any rational person would expect that we would be importing more than we are exporting. So that's a little bit about why Donald J. did this whole tariff thing. That's at least the history of it. Let's actually talk about what he did. Because essentially what he decided to do was to take our trade deficits with these various countries and then impose a tariff on them because he assumes that this deficit is harming us. I know it doesn't really make sense, not for those of us who operate in the real world and have actually been in a grocery store, since he thinks it's really novel to just say grocery. That's a thing called groceries. There is. I might have to put a parody of that in here, like just go groceries. You know, little Trump groceries.
Groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof. And I campaigned on that. I talked about the word groceries for a lot. But likewise, an old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it on the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it. Groceries went through the roof. And I campaigned on that.
It's ridiculous. Anyway, I got a little video clip because these people in Canada, it's actually a Canadian news source. I love it because you know what? They should all win. If there's business people here who actually decided to vote for Donald J. and do this to all of us, the Canadians and the rest of the world should win. At least that's what I think. I mean, maybe it's not super American. I'm out here doing what I can to try to make sure we win. So maybe if all of them collectively got together and made sure that we all win, that'd be great. But if they're continuing to support the craziness of Donald J., I'm going to be rooting for the good guys. I'm going to be rooting for the good people who don't think he's going to help anyone, because he's not. He's not going to help us. Anyway, let's go to that video that explains exactly how Trump arrived at these numbers and came up with this handy-dandy little chart.
Now, yesterday was a big day for Trump, Liberation Day, the announcement of universal and reciprocal tariffs against almost every single country on Earth. And the key prop of the afternoon was this chart.
It's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing.
That giant board was page one of a list of new reciprocal tariffs against more than 180 countries, which is almost all of them. And you can't make it out so far away, but if I show you the original image that board was made from, you can see the second column corresponding to each country is labeled in fine print, tariffs charged to the USA. And then in even finer print, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. And every country shows a different number. What they appear to have done was to take the US trade deficit in physical goods with each country, divided by total US imports of goods from that country, turn that into a percentage, and that's it. That's what they misleadingly call tariffs charged to the USA. And if I actually do the math for you, you'll see why this doesn't make any sense. Take China. We can find from government figures what the US trade deficit with them was last year, and that's $295.4 billion. If you divide that number by total US imports from China that same year, that's $438.9 billion. One number divided by the other, and what you get is 67.3%. And sure enough, this is the tariff the Trump White House accuses China of charging. Problem is, this number is clearly not derived at all from any tariff China charges. Now, I've manually checked all 185 countries on this list. It took me about 3 hours, and every single tariff appeared to have been calculated this same way. The White House would eventually publish this explanation, where they show a more complicated looking formula, except we can break this down too. And this might be a bit much, but for transparency, let's dive right in. The effective tariff rate, that's this series of symbols and letters on the left, that's what they're trying to figure out for each country, right? And to get there, they take into account how sensitive customers are to higher prices and how likely prices are to increase, which they set at 4 and 0.25, respectively. But multiply them, and they effectively cancel each other out to equal simply 1. And we know that multiplying anything by 1 does nothing. So clean that up, and you're left with something a lot more straightforward, where X is defined as total goods exports, M is total goods imports. Subtract one from the other. That's what a trade deficit is. How much more they sell to you than you sell to them. But it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Just to use an analogy, they're like we as households, we as consumers, we have trade surpluses and trade deficits with different entities in the economy. Most of us run a massive trade deficit with our grocery store. Most of us have a massive trade surplus with our employer. They pay us, but we don't buy anything from them. Are these things that are problems we need to remedy? So in some sense, the underlying premise that bilateral trade imbalances are necessarily bad is just wrong.
But Trump thinks they're bad. He would prefer to be the seller making money as opposed to the buyer spending it, which he's allowed to think. But again, this claim of his that all these numbers on this list are effectively the tariff rates that countries charge the US when they're just not at all. And then to use those simplistic calculations to in turn inform the actual reciprocal tariff that as a matter of official trade policy, the US is going to then impose on actual products from real businesses all over the world. We've seen how even the simple threat of tariffs can erase trillions of dollars in stock market value and force companies on every side of the border into a decision-making tailspin because they don't know how to plan their supply chains in the face of such wacky numbers.
We may have short-term some little pain, and people understand that.
And Trump would say this works towards a noble and important goal, which is to restore the economic engine of American manufacturing. Except This most recent attempt to level the playing field, it isn't supported by sophisticated models or rigorous analysis. It's a shortcut, an oversimplified reduction arbitrarily divided by 2.
And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us.
The idea behind them was that Trump could use the tariffs we're imposing and say, oh, you're imposing a 90% tariff, but we're going to impose a 45% tariff, so let's negotiate your tariffs down. But when the 90% number is fake, then what do you do? Like, how do you negotiate it down? If you're Cambodia or Vietnam, how do you know how far to bring it down, and what are you even bringing down? Because the core problem isn't the trade barriers you have in place. The core problem is you're not buying enough stuff from the United States, and we're buying too much stuff, in Trump's mind, from you.
I'll show you one last thing. This list, one other thing I found curious was how so many countries have exactly 10% written here as the effective tariff rate that they charge the US. Isn't that weird? Like, all these countries charge the US the exact same 10% rate? Well, again, I checked every single one, and all of them, all 115 of them, actually buy more from the US than they sell, which gives the US a trade surplus. As in, by Trump's definition, these are the countries the US currently rips off. But Trump's answer to that is to punish them anyway, to charge their goods a 10% tariff. I don't know what logic explains that.
Which, by the way, Donald J., I think it's important to note, you can keep saying reciprocal tariffs. You can put that on there with the little presidential seal or whatever you got there, but that does not mean that those other countries had tariffs on us just because there was a trade deficit. That is how Donald J. decided to put tariffs on 180 other countries of the world, including some of them that are not inhabited by people, but simply by penguins. Now, let's talk for 3 seconds, well, maybe longer, about what the future looks like if these tariffs remain in place. It's really hard to say immediately or even about 6 months out, even though Caroline Leavitt, somebody called her the BS Barbie. I have to say, I kind of liked it. I'm not normally like that, but she does not say the truth, like, at all. She's like a Donald J. puppet. Well, I kind of guess they all are. But back to what we can expect if these tariffs stay in place. It's not good. Prices are going to go up. Businesses aren't going to expand. People are going to lose jobs. I don't think the decline of the stock market is over yet, and neither does a lot of economists. I listened to an excellent panel on MSNBC, and here's Steve Leisman telling us a little bit about what's been happening even just the last few days in the stock market and what was happening before that.
This is now day 2 where the markets have lost trillions of dollars in value, and this is most likely just the beginning.
Can I start off in correcting you, Stephanie? It's not day 2. This is day 2 of the most extreme part of this sell-off. What's really important, I think, to know is the market has sold off continuously since Donald Trump took office. Trillions of dollars have come off of the market cap of the stock market in anticipation of a plan that was going to be a lot less severe than when we found out Thursday. I think it's important to make this distinction, not just to correct you on air gratuitously. I think
that's fun.
Right. Okay. So I think the importance here is they already hated what they thought they were going to get, which they thought was not going to be as bad as it was going to be. Then he comes out with this crazy plan based on, we can talk about the formula, and I can tell you how I found out about the formula, but it was a formula that nobody had ever seen before, based upon things that were basically made up as a formula for figuring out. And that's when the market decided, I thought this was going to be bad. Now I'm finding out this is going to be much, much worse than I thought it was going to be. And that's what Powell, the Fed chair, said today. It is now clear, I'm not quoting him exactly, but I'm getting the sense right. It is now clear that the economic effects of the tariffs will be much larger than expected. So just to be clear, the plan that President Trump was thinking of before, which was the one the market had priced in, had already caused the market to sell off trillions. These are an additional trillions because the plan is far, far worse than had been expected.
I'm going to put a link for that entire video into the doobly-doo because they had great information about the farm tariffs.
When these tariffs do hit, though, even if, obviously we're talking markets, but there might not be Wall Street investors, in the heartland of America, but people have 401ks, they have retirement accounts, and prices are going to go up. Do people know that?
Well, right now prices are going down. Soybeans went down 22 cents overnight. That was a 3% drop. They're down 22% since Trump was elected. China has found other customers in Brazil and Argentina. And so in Iowa, people say, okay, short-term gain, short-term pain, long-term gain, except all we ever get is the pain. We never get the gain. Corn is at the same price now in real terms as it was during the Civil War.
And you can grow corn in Iowa. What you can't grow is coffee. It is more than water. More Americans drink coffee every day than drink water every day. You can get it. You can grow it in Hawaii. You can get Kona coffee there. You cannot get it here. We have people who are going to their local coffee shop to support their local business people and buying 3 and 4 and 5 pounds of coffee. Yes, because they want to support them, but also they're very afraid that the price is going to go through the roof. We cannot produce that.
One other point I'd like to make is that farmers got up over $70 billion during the China trade war in the first Trump term. People keep saying it's $23 billion.
Yeah.
That's just from 1 year. That's inaccurate. It's actually 70 to 100 billion, which is going to these same big ag conglomerates as well. And so farmers back in the first trade war with China, in the first Trump administration, were saying, joking about their Trump bump. And so as long as they were on welfare, it's all okay. They were buying them off. And they were saying, we'd rather make money from the market, but, if you want to give us $100 billion, that'll do.
Okay, so the farmers can get bought off with a potential other farm aid package. But what about all the businesses? What about the business Chris is talking about? Businesses big and small that make consumer products that we simply can't start producing here. What's going to be the next leg in this trade?
A recession. I mean, that's really, if you ask me the ins and outs and all the 30,000-foot view of what's happening in the market, you cannot do what the tax foundation believes will happen, which is to end 1/3 of all imports to the United States. We import about $3 trillion worth of stuff. The tax foundation believes $900 billion goes away, and not have something dramatic and unfortunately terrible happen to the U.S. economy.
Right now, essentially, soybeans that farmers are growing are worthless. Other economies of the world are going to be getting their soybeans somewhere else. And after USAID and the FDA and all these other areas that used to have government money buying up some of this produce from our farmers and shipping it elsewhere, now that there's no market for that because Elon Musk took out his chainsaw, our farmers are seriously hurting. And I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but the only thing that propped them up during the last Trump administration was welfare. Like, essentially, we paid farmers for stuff they couldn't sell anymore. I'm not sure why it is that we wouldn't just have the farmers grow the stuff and give it to the kids for school lunch, or let people in Africa have a meal. If we're going to be paying these amounts of money for our farmers to grow things, How about we use it to feed people? Seems reasonable to me. Back to Caroline Levitt. She recently, and I tried to find the clip. I try not to watch her really. It's hard to watch her. She's just lying all the time. And I don't like that. But essentially what she said is, Trump's policies are off to getting the economy roaring. Okay, Caroline, something he just did 2 days ago has not had any impact on the economy. In fact, if you look here, they cite the job numbers for March. He had this announcement in April. No impact. And when you have an economy as large as the United States, it does not turn on a dime. It takes months and months and months for the economic impact to start to show. That's where the Democrats got a little frustrated. You see, they had this great infrastructure act that was putting people back to work and helping to make things more fair in the economy for the American worker, but it takes time to roll those things out. And even in the time that it takes to roll it out, it takes time before we feel the impact. Now, of course, Donald J. stopped the infrastructure bill. All the jobs and all the bridges and all the things that were going to help this keep going and help the American workers, he stopped. And then he did these tariffs. It will take time before we see the full impact of this. But here's a few thoughts. If business owners wanted to have businesses manufacturing things here in the United States, they would have done that. Forcing them to do it isn't helpful. Not helpful at all. We also have low unemployment, according to Caroline. Yay! This means when we get these manufacturing jobs, there's no one to work there. I mean, I guess we could take the thousands of scientists that Trump laid off, creating all those brilliant ideas that were helping the U.S. economy run, and let them work in the manufacturing plant. Does this make any sense to you? I mean, did anybody think about this? So, this is what we've done. We've cut education, we've fired scientists who were coming up with great ideas to help improve the world and improve our lives, and maybe even save us from this catastrophe of climate change. I'd like them working on that. But instead, we've fired them, changed our whole educational system, and now we're going to force businesses who don't want to run factories to start factories. When we go to hire the American worker in these factories, the wages will have to be higher than they were from the other countries who were more efficient at it, which means we never get away from this high inflation unless we stop Trump now. In fact, just last night, I was talking to somebody with a very brilliant financial mind about all of these matters. And then he said, I still don't get why they're trying to do this. There has to be a good outcome. Well, one of those outcomes is the rich will gobble up all of those family farms that will go under, just like they did in the housing crisis when people were losing their homes. So that's one thing that they'll benefit. But why would they want all these factory jobs instead of scientists creating innovative ideas? Project 2025 wants to bring us to the Handmaid's Tale. Yes, where all of us are just lemmings working out there in the workforce with no personal choices on where we can work, just helping to fuel the industrial machine. Now, the person that I was talking to said, well, what we have isn't that much different. And you know, that person's right. What we have isn't that much different because we do have great big oligarchs and billionaires who have been ensuring that Americans don't get an adequate wage in comparison to their lovely CEO salaries and such. But you see, The Handmaid's Tale takes this a step further. And you see, so does Project 2025. Women aren't in their plan. Women just stay home, make babies, and do that sort of womanly stuff. And people of color, we'd like you to go back to being our lovely maids and servants and I don't know what. I know in The Handmaid's Tale, and I always thought it was great of them that they did this, they had people of color in some positions of power. But I kept thinking to myself, that is not how that would work. Now, the person I was talking to said, that can't be it. Because after all, that seems just crazy. I am going to say it again. Earlier, my predictions were right. This is what they're trying to do. Nothing I have predicted so far has not been correct. When people were saying the tariffs won't be bad, I was saying they will. He does not care and he does not understand how this works. All you have to do is consider the chart. So today is hands off. The day I'm recording this, people all over the United States and various parts of the world are protesting Donald J. Trump and this horrible MAGA administration. I can't be there. I live in Mexico, and I know there's one protest here. I think it's in Culiacan, but I've also heard that Americans can't protest. Like the expats can't protest here, which does make sense because I wouldn't want us changing the Mexican politics. That is for the Mexican people to do. However, what I do plan to do this weekend is contact everyone with an R behind their name in the House. In my opinion, they need to hold a vote against these tariffs. And if Mike Johnson won't let them hold that vote, then they need to get rid of Mike Johnson. Period. We need to take our country back because this is the other piece of fallout we're going to have. All the other nations of the world are already creating new trade routes. They are not going to let us back in. After all, we have 70 million people in our country who voted for a madman, and for some reason, they haven't woken up to this. So until we have people who are more woke, yes, we need some more woke people, I don't think anyone in the world should trust us. I wouldn't. So do me a favor, let me know what you think about this video. Please also like it so that other people can see it, and please subscribe to this channel. There is a lot of good information here about what's going on in our current economy, and once we get somebody in the White House who will actually work with Congress to create good benefits, good gravy, we have to get rid of all those Republicans. And please subscribe to this channel. My aim is to make sure that you know as much about economics, government policy, how this all works so that we can build something better in America. Joe Biden said build back better, but we are going to take what we had and just simply make it better. They already wrecked a bunch of it. We'll make it better. So subscribe so we can be on the cutting edge with all of those ideas, and share with me what you think. Those of you who have shared some ideas with me are right on track. We've got a lot of good things going on. If you want to see that Handmaid's Tale video that I did 2 months ago about how Trump's tariffs were going to impact us, click right there and I'll see you again.